All right, welcome back. Last time we talked, we were learning about Darwin's theory of evolution and the 4 steps for evolution. Now we want to see what is the evidence that supports his evolution. Why do most scientists on this planet say, yep, he got it right? This, I will warn you, is about the longest set of notes we take in all of biology, so I'll try to talk really fast to go through it quickly for you. All right, the first evidence for evolution. These are called homologous structures. Remember, the prefix homo means same, so it's an indicator that they had the same ancestor. So they're similar features in different species that indicate a common ancestor. And I just think this diagram is just wacky for most students. It's a really weird concept. Take a look at the human arm and notice that you have a humerus. That's the bone of your upper arm, and then you have 2 bones here, the radius and ulna, and then you have some carpals and phalanges, which make up your hands. If you look at the different animals that are listed here, they all have those same structures, only they're slightly modified. That modification is an indication of a mutation. Now, did they all come from humans, or did humans come from them? Nope. But the idea is that all 4 of these species that are listed here came from a common ancestor. And that ancestor was not a penguin, an alligator, a bat, or a human. It's just that that ancestor also had a humerus, a radius ulna, carpals, and phalange bones. And over time, mutations that changed the shape of those bones allowed penguins to swim in the ocean, and alligators to crawl on land, and bats to fly through the air, and humans to make tools. And so it's mutations that are causing this. Darwin, remember, didn't know what a mutation was. He just knew that they were born with differences. So homologous structures. All right, and then this is just another example of homologous structures. We don't say that humans, so this, the animal on the far right, that's not a human, that's an Australopithecine, which is sort of an ancient human, but we don't consider, human beings are called Homo sapiens. So the Australopithecine is not the same as a human. And sometimes there's a misunderstanding. Sometimes students think that evolution says that humans came from gorillas or chimpanzees or something like that. And that's all false. This is the same idea as on the last page. We have a common ancestor, and that ancestor was not a gorilla or a chimpanzee or an orangutan or a human. It was some common ancestor, and it's more like we're cousins. So if you said that you came from your cousin, that's the same thing as saying that humans came from gorillas. But what we're seeing here are their homologous structures, the structures in their bodies that are similar and might indicate common ancestry. All right, this next one is kind of freaky also. These are called vestigial structures. A vestige of something is like something that comes from the past. So it's kind of a tricky word for students, but these are features in a modern body that have no apparent purpose, but they may have been useful to an ancestor. And so that might explain why animals today have them. So for example, I think this one's the weirdest one of all. Whales have a pelvis. The pelvis is the bone that holds your legs. And dogs have a pelvis, and cats have a pelvis, and anybody that has legs has a pelvis. But whales, if you dissect a whale, there's a pelvis way back in the back end of their bodies. But they don't have legs. They don't even have flippers. They got nothing back there. Why is there a pelvis? Well, the idea is that whales used to be 4-legged animals. Now, don't get me wrong. There was never a 4-legged whale, but their ancestors were sort of wolf-like animals that lived on land with 4 legs. And over time, they moved into the water, and they hunted in the water, and then eventually they learned how to swim well in the water. And those that had useful variations, those that had mutations that caused maybe their back limbs to be smaller, which created less drag and allowed them to swim more efficiently, those guys survived better than the ones that still had these legs. And so whales today are generation after generation, many generations of mutations caused the legs to disappear, but they still have a pelvis. That mutation there's not been a mutation that caused the pelvis to disappear. Other examples, humans have a tailbone. That's what you're seeing in the blue picture. Does that mean that humans ever had a tail? Absolutely not. Humans have never had a tail. tail. But the idea is that our ancestors, which were not gorillas or chimpanzees, but some ancestor in the past had a tail. And over time, mutations that created no tail or a very short tail were advantageous. Humans didn't need a tail. So not having to eat to feed a tail was advantageous. So a mutation that produced no tail, that was a good thing. And then even snakes have leg bones, but they're inside, they're under their skin, kind of around their rib cage. They're these rudimentary or real simple leg bones there. That's a mutation that caused their legs to disappear, and that was advantageous for snakes. All right, and I will say there's a really cool video. I'll try to link it on our Canvas page. That's just about how whales changed over time. It's a very interesting video. All right, number 3, we're talking about evidence for evolution. Again, Darwin didn't know about DNA, so as time has gone on, scientists have learned more and more and more, and they're going, yeah, this makes sense with what Darwin had said. If what they found contradicted what Darwin said, then we would throw Darwin's idea out. So it says, when comparing DNA sequences between closely related species, in this case, we're looking at humans, chimpanzee, gorilla, orangutan, and even dogs, the pattern supports the idea of slight modifications or mutations over time. So if you look at the letters of the DNA, they're incredibly similar. And the ones that are most similar are the humans and the chimpanzees. The ones that are most different are the humans and the dogs. But still, there's lots of similarities, even between a human and a dog. And why would there be so many similarities? Well, I want you to think about the fact that I have 2 eyes, I have teeth, I have ears, I have a heart, I have lungs, I have, intestines and a stomach, and so does a dog. And so we actually have way more in common with a dog than we have that's different from a dog. And so that helps explain some of those similarities. And so the idea is mutations over time caused our ancestors to change, and we became different animals. All right, number 4 is the fossil record, and I mentioned this earlier and when we talked about fossils. The transitional species, we see changes in the fossil record over time. So let me just give you one quick example because it's super easy. This down at the bottom is an ancient relative of the horse, and at that time it had 4 toes. And as we go through time and get closer and closer, recent means this is a current horse. As we go through time, we see mutations in the foot bones. So here we see the next species that arrived. Notice there's a dark line right here. That's a mutation. One of the toes vanished, and so now it's walking on 3 toes. And if we look, we see the 2 toes on the side getting smaller and smaller. And now the modern horse walks just on 1 toe, and it has tiny little nubbins of toes that are left over from the past. Those would be their vestigial structures that they don't use anymore. All right, we're going to switch gears here just a little bit. This is not necessarily evidence for evolution. This is what we do with that evidence. It's called cladistics, and it's a way of making sort of family trees. And you're going to do an activity online where you make some family trees and kind of get a sense of how cladistics works. So cladistics looks at structures in the fossil record that are considered innovations. That's a fancy word for just meaning a new feature that's arrived, a new variation, a new adaptation. And you can see some of these. It's super simplistic here. But in this data table here, hair, amniotic egg, so it's an egg with a shell on it, 4 legs, jaws, and vertebrae, a backbone. Those are examples of the innovations. And it says these characteristics appear in later organisms, but not in earlier ones. And they're called derived characters. You don't have to memorize that. Just listen for the moment. The more derived characters a species has, the further along it is placed on the cladogram. So that means if it doesn't have very many of these characteristics that are listed in this data table, if the organism doesn't have very many of them, then they must have evolved really early in history. But if the organism has all of them, then that must be a really recent organism because each one is a new arrival, a new mutation. And so if somebody has all of them, they must be pretty recent in the fossil record. So then the scientists use that to organize where to place them on the timeline. It's called a cladogram or a phylogenetic tree. So that's what we're looking at here. So the lancelet, if you look at the lancelet and it's right here, it does not have hair, it doesn't have eggs, legs, it doesn't have legs, it doesn't have jaws, and it doesn't have vertebrae. So we say that's the earliest in history. That's the oldest animal. It's like a timeline, and the lancelet is the first thing on the timeline. The lamprey has one of those things. It has a backbone. So we say, okay, the lamprey is next. The tuna has 2 of them. The salamander has 3 of them. The turtle has 4 of them. And the leopard has all of those innovations, all of those derived characters. So we say the leopard arrived most recently. It's the youngest species on this timeline. All right, so let's go ahead and try this ourselves. I don't know how well this is going to work on the video, but I'll try it. So it says, to make a cladogram, you must first look at the animals you are studying and establish characteristics that they share and ones that are unique to each group. For the animals on the table, so you need to do this on your paper, indicate whether the characteristic is present or not. I don't think I can type on this, so you're going to need to just hand enter it on your assignment. Based on that chart, create a cladogram like the one pictured on the previous page for the animals below. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's take a look at a slug. So a slug, is it made of cells? Yes, anything that's alive is made of cells. So under A, everybody's going to be a yes. They're all made of cells, but we're going to do slug. So we're going to go across. So does a slug have hair? No. Does it have, so added as I'm talking, does it have legs? No. Does it have a backbone? No. And does it have opposable thumbs? No. So it's all no's for that one. Human, does it have hair? Yes. Legs? Yes. Backbone? Yes. Thumbs? Yes. Frog, hair? No. Legs? Yes. Backbone? Yes. Thumbs? Not opposable thumbs. They kind of have cool looking feet, but they're not called opposable thumbs. So no for the opposable thumbs. Catfish? Yes for cells. No for hair. The whiskers are not hairs. No for legs. Yes for backbone. And no for thumbs. And then the tiger, cells, yes. Hair, yes. Legs, yes. Backbone, yes. Thumbs, no. So now as we read across, the one that arrives the earliest, the animal that arrives the earliest is the one that has the fewest yeses. So that would be the slug. So I'm just going to move this number 1. Let's see if I can't do it. Shoot. I thought I could do it on the video and I wonder if I could do it this way. Hold on. Got an idea. All right, let's try this. Let's move this 1. Nope, it won't move. Okay, so we're just going to have to do it. I'm just going to have to talk you through it. Give me a second to get back into the big way. Okay, so the one that has the fewest yeses is going to be the one that shows up first. So you're going to put slug right here. You could write the word slug if you want. And the only thing that it does have is cells. So down here on this the long diagonal line, you're going to write cells right there. It has cells. You could write the letter A if you want. That's fine also. Okay, the next one is the one that has only 2 of the 2 yeses, and that would be the catfish. The catfish has cells and a backbone, but it doesn't have anything else. And so what got added, the new innovation, is the backbone. It goes right there. All right, the next one has 3 yeses. So that would be, I'm looking, that's the frog. And what does the frog have that nobody's had before? That would be back legs. So you're going to, just legs. You're going to add that. All right, and then the one that has 4 yeses is the tiger, and what it has that nobody's had before is hair. And then the last one is human, and what it has that nobody else on this diagram has is opposable thumbs. Now, this is obviously really simple. We've got billions of animals and organisms to place on these cladograms, but we're just showing you how to make a cladogram, and then you're going to do one. You're going to do this several times actually on this PBS website. All right, let's continue with talking about sort of evidence for evolution and things that we see as sort of supporting Darwin's theory. So the first one is called coevolution. This occurs when the evolution of one species affects the evolution of another. So the example is acacia ants and acacia trees. Acacia trees have formed a mutation that causes them to create these little packets of sugar during photosynthesis, but the packets are on the outside of the leaf. And that actually feeds the acacia ants that live on it. So the acacia ants pluck these little sugar packets off and they feed it to their offspring. But here's where it gets weird. In return, because they live on the tree, the ants then attack any herbivores that might try to eat the tree. They bite the herbivore, so the herbivore goes away. So these 2 organisms, the tree and the ants, they've evolved to live together. And their evolution evolution has supported one another. So that's called coevolution. Okay, a totally different type of evolution is called divergent evolution. And this is one you're probably most familiar with, even though you've never called it that. This occurs when members of the same species migrate into different habitats. Different traits or mutations are favorable in different habitats, so the populations gradually change. Classic example here is Darwin's finches. And I don't know if I don't have it labeled there. So these are Darwin's finches. So the idea is that there's an original species that starts out on the mainland of South America. And then these birds got blown or they moved to the Galapagos Islands off the coast of South America. But on the different islands, the different Galapagos Islands, there are different food sources. Some islands have good plant food sources or seeds. Some have different insects, et cetera, et cetera. So there's different food sources depending on what island they're on. So over time, as these birds move to these different islands, different mutations became advantageous and they began to change so that they're actually identified as 13 different species of finches. And they don't mate with each other because they are ideally suited to their particular environment on their particular island. So that's an example of divergent evolution. Now, the exact opposite, which is still evidence for evolution, it's funny that opposites could still be evidence, is called convergent evolution. Convergent, to diverge, means to come apart. So they started as one species and now they're 13 different bird species in that example. Convergent is where you have distantly related organisms. They're not closely related, but they evolve to start to look alike. And the classic example of this is the dolphin and the shark. Lots and lots of people think the dolphins and sharks are closely related because, goodness, they look a lot alike. But it turns out they're not. Dolphins are mammals like us. They need to breathe air, so they have to come up and breathe air. They give live birth just like we do. They even have some hair like we do. There's a lot that they have in common with us. Whereas shark are fish. They have fins, so they can breathe underwater. They don't need to come up for air. They lay eggs. Some of them lay eggs in their own bodies and then they hatch in their body. That doesn't matter. It's not the same kind of live birth that the mammals have. So these guys are not closely related. So convergent evolution occurs when species that are not closely related evolve similar traits because they live in similar environments that select for similar mutations. So it's best to be streamlined and to have this kind of streamlined shape if you're going to live underwater. So the dolphins, they would have been related to mammals that probably had 4 legs. And so if you dissect, for example, if you dissect a dolphin fin, it has the same arm bones that you and I have, but they're in this totally mutated shape. That's because an arm bone is not very good. I mean, our arms are not very good. We're not very efficient swimmers, but to have a mutation that causes you to have this nice streamlined fin, that worked great for the dolphins. Sharks, if you dissect a shark fin, it's just cartilage. It doesn't have the bones that we have and then that dolphins have. So it indicates that we're not closely related to the sharks. All right, and it says, although these organisms look alike, DNA analysis indicates that they are not closely related. All right, and then related to convergent evolution, what we just talked about are the structures themselves. They're called analogous structures. So I gave the example of the dolphin fin and the shark fin. And if you dissect them, they look nothing alike. That's an example of analogous structures. In this example, the wings are examples of analogous structures. If we dissect a bird wing, it has the same bones that we have. If we dissect an insect wing, it doesn't even have bones. So that's an indicator that although they both fly, although they both have wings, they are not closely related. All right, next, let's talk about artificial selection. Whenever something is artificial, that means humans have gotten involved. So this occurs when humans deliberately select certain characteristics for breeding in order to produce species that are useful for us or for our personal preference. Dogs are a classic example. So we're in essence speeding up the process of evolution. So we would not have seen these species of dogs if humans had not got involved in breeding. But the same thing can be said about corn or horses or cows or chickens. All these things, all of our crops, we've bred them specifically to have certain traits. And so that's called artificial selection. All right, and then this is, I think, the last section on sexual selection. Sexual selection was kind of puzzling to Darwin. So, this occurs when members of one gender, typically females, choose mates based on a specific trait or behavior of the other. Females have a limited number of eggs, so they can have a limited number of offspring. But males have virtually endless sperm, so they might have hundreds of millions of sperm. So, therefore, females tend to be pickier about whom they mate with to best increase the odds of their offspring's survival. What that means is the females want the best, healthiest male to mate with so that they have the best, healthiest offspring. But the males, they don't care who they mate with often. They just want to have as many babies as possible. So they're willing to mate with any female, whereas the females are like, yeah, I'm not mating with him. I'm not mating with him. I'm only going to mate with him. The trait that females are searching for should be an indicator of the overall health or fitness of the male. So this is what's puzzling. If you look at this, this is just one example of many, but look at the two bird species in this example. Peacocks are such an easy example. The male peacock has this ginormous tail. That should make him super obvious to predators. It makes it hard for him to fly, and it should make it hard for him to escape from predators. Why would any female ever mate with a male that has that giant tail? Well, Darwin finally came on it. He thought, okay, the females are looking, and it turns out the females can even count those spots, and they know which males have the most spots on their tails. That indicates how big their tails are. The females are choosing the males with the biggest tails because only healthy males can grow such big tails. That means that male is not sick with a disease. That means that male is eating plenty of food. And that means that male has somehow been able to escape from predators. And so the female looks at him and says, that's who I'm going to mate with. And that has to work. If it doesn't work, then her babies don't survive. So in this case, they're looking for traits that males have because it's an indicator of how healthy they are. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for the notes. Let me know if you have any questions.